My name is Jacob, and I'm a painter. I was born and raised in northern Washington, in a small town near the Canadian border. I don't want to reveal my exact location or the location of my encounter because I'm still here. Only a few people know about this. It's hard to tell my story in Washington, especially because some movies about vampires and werewolves came out right before this happened. Those movies took place in Washington, too. So here it is. I started residential painting in high school for my uncle, saving up to buy my first truck. After high school, I thought I'd try a different profession, but nothing else piqued my interest. So I went back to painting for my uncle. He suggested I go to a tech school and get formal training in the trade if I planned on making it my permanent career. So I went to a tech school in Spokane, just south of where I live. I learned painting on a whole new level, plus other skills like collision repair, upholstery, and welding. After school, I returned to my hometown and worked for my uncle's business. A few years later, my uncle, approaching 60, decided to quit the painting industry to pursue something less stressful. His business wasn't huge, he had 7 employees besides me, but he had a lot of equipment, including several vans set up for painting. So I asked to buy him out and start my own business. At first, managing the few employees and incoming business was easy, but finding work became difficult when winter came. Only 2 of the 7 employees returned in the spring. I kept doing most of the work myself, which was stressful but saved me money. After a few years, I sold off most of the extra vehicles and ran the business alone. During the housing crash of 2007 to 2008, I managed to stay busy, sometimes hiring a few painters back during the busy season. One summer day in 2012, I got a call from a lady inquiring about some cabinet work in aging wood to make her newly remodeled log home look more rustic. She had seen my work at a local pizzeria and wanted me to create a similar look for her kitchen. After explaining the complicated process and the toxic nature of the varnish I had used, I tried to dissuade her from using it. But she was determined. She didn't plan to live in the house for a while since she was a snowbird, spending winters down south. The house was about an hour north, along the Canadian border, near a bridge that had flooded earlier that year. That weekend, I drove up to inspect the job. The log home was close to the riverbank, which had flooded during the spring melt. The lady had bought the home as is and remodeled it, installing new wood cabinets and flooring. She wanted the same varnish I had used on the pizzeria, despite my warnings about the toxic fumes and the lengthy drying process. I gave her a ballpark figure, and she didn't hesitate to agree. In October, I started the job. The first week was spent prepping the wood, distressing it, scratching it, and adding saw marks for that rustic charm. The second week was the tough part, applying the conversion varnish. The fumes were horrid, and I had forgotten to buy new filters for my respirator. Fortunately, I found my uncle's old air-fed suit in my van. It's a suit that supplies air from the outside through a hose, so I figured it would keep me safe from the varnish fumes. That Monday, I started applying the white conversion varnish to the tongue and groove walls. Around 4 p.m., I got a text warning of flash floods, and by 9 p.m., my wife FaceTimed me. As I stepped out of my suit to answer the call, I noticed a strange, blackish hand lifting the attic door out of place. My wife screamed at me to look up. I turned just in time to see the hand disappear back into the attic. I thought it was an animal, but it didn't seem right. I decided to investigate, despite my wife's protests. I taped my phone to my suit so she could see what I saw through the video call. Armed with a flashlight and a spray gun, I climbed the ladder into the attic. At first, I didn't see anything, but then I noticed a mass of dark brown fur along the wall. Thinking it was a black bear, I called down to my wife. As I examined it closer, I realized it wasn't a bear. The creature was standing on 2 legs, its fur matted with mud. It had the head of a wolf, long claws, and glowing yellow eyes. Another creature, slightly smaller, sat hunched against the wall, and I noticed what looked like small limbs behind it. I realized these weren't animals. They were something far more terrifying. Terrified, I backed away, but the larger creature started moving toward me. I raised my spray gun and shot a line of varnish across its back. The creature let out a deep growl but didn't attack. I backed down the ladder, shut the attic door, and ran out of the house, telling my wife to call the police. I drove home through the storm, too scared to look in the rearview mirror. The next day, I returned with my friend Max, a local sheriff. We found muddy paw prints and streaks of varnish in the attic, but the creatures were gone. Max called Jared, a park ranger, who told us he had never heard of werewolf sightings in the area, only Bigfoot sightings. We decided to keep the incident quiet and tell the homeowner it was a bear cub that had wandered into the attic during the storm. Though I finished the job with a couple of other painters, I'll never forget what I saw in that attic. Even today, when I drive past the pizzeria, I think about that night and how close I came to something I never want to experience again. The story I'm going to share happened to my father and uncle. My father, who we'll call S, was a truck driver, and my uncle, N, joined him on a cross-country trip during his holidays. Back then, my dad was 22, and my uncle was 16. On the third day of the trip, they entered Nevada around dusk. About an hour later, they were planning to pull into the next rest stop, which was about 3 miles away. As they got closer, my uncle pointed out a large coyote off the side of the road. "Take a look at that. That's one big coyote," he said, surprised. My father glanced at it and agreed. "Good Lord, that's really big." The coyote disappeared into a patch of forest as they drove by. They arrived at the rest stop, and my father felt uneasy. The area was almost completely empty, and he regretted leaving his gun at home. My uncle got out to use the restroom while my dad prepared the truck for the night. But moments later, my uncle came sprinting back, yanking the door open and locking it behind him. "What's wrong?" my dad asked. My uncle, breathless, replied, "Nothing. I just heard something rustling in the bushes outside the bathroom." Later that night, my dad slept soundly, but my uncle kept waking up to the sound of soft tapping around the truck, like the clicking of a dog's claws on a wooden floor. The noise happened several times until my uncle gave up and put a pillow over his head to get some rest. The next morning, my dad woke up to a sunny Nevada day. He went to the bathroom, then returned to the truck to find scratches on the passenger side door, as if a dog's claws had dragged across it. He pointed them out to my uncle, who noticed them too. "We'll just get them painted over," my dad said casually. They continued their trip without much incident until they pulled over near Happy Creek to relieve themselves. As they climbed back into the truck, they heard a howl not too far away. They quickly drove off, but soon, something thumped against the trailer, followed by a low growl and a strange voice saying, "Ow." Without thinking, my dad floored the gas, pushing the truck over 80 miles per hour. Whatever had hit the trailer was now running alongside the cab, keeping pace with the truck. The creature smoothly shifted from running on 4 legs to 2, and it outpaced the truck. In the headlights, they saw fur and hind legs that looked like a dog. Or coyotes, but something about it was off. It turned to look at the truck and let out a shriek, a horrifying mix of a wolf's howl, a woman's scream, and a rabbit's death cry. The creature leaped onto the hood of the truck, clawing at the engine bay. My dad honked the horn, and it jumped off just before the truck ran it over. He pressed the pedal harder, pushing the truck over 100 miles per hour, desperate to escape. They heard another demonic screech from the distance as they sped away. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but after dropping off the trailer in Houston, my dad and uncle bought plane tickets to return home, not wanting to talk about what had happened. To this day, they rarely speak about that night in Nevada. This happened between 10 to 15 years ago. I work at a well-known American retail store. The store had recently undergone a renovation, and you could feel a sense of unease within its walls. Though it was built in 2007, the land it sat on had a long history. A Dutch settlement, then an English settlement, a pirate hideout, and later a conservation project. But the part of its history that stands out most is the fact that the New Jersey Meadowlands area was heavily used as a dumping ground since before World War II. It served as a landfill for all sorts of wastes known to man. Rubble from London during the Blitz, medical waste, mercury, and PCBs in the 1960s, and, of course, bodies. In 2002, when they added an exit on the New Jersey Turnpike to a nearby train depot. Over 4,000 bodies were exhumed from the area. These were the only known bodies excavated, but who knows how many more are still out there waiting to be found. Enough about that. During my time at this store, there have been many instances where the paranormal has shown itself. A shadow man has been spotted in the tire shop by a friend of mine who worked in maintenance. Random products have jumped off shelves when no one was near them. Roll-up doors have opened on their own. You might hear someone sneeze in the coolers when you're the only one inside. As strange as these occurrences were, they could often be brushed off as natural events. Items falling? Maybe they were just hanging off the edge. The shadow man? Could have been a trick of the light. But the roll-up doors? That was harder to explain, since the doors could only be activated by a button, and once fully closed, nothing should have been able to trigger the door to open again. It wasn't until the creepiest thing happened to me personally that I could no longer push these strange incidents aside. One night, I was working overnight, stocking shelves, ensuring the store was ready for daytime customers. I had just finished restocking merchandise and was looking for my co-workers, C and L, to help me with some TVs from the back. As soon as I turned to head toward the stockroom, I saw C standing a few aisles away, just staring at me. Speak of the devil, I thought, smiling at him. Perfect timing, man. I was just about to come looking for you. I called out, but C didn't respond. He just stood there staring, which was odd. I was about to say something else when he turned his back and started walking toward the back room. I was a bit irritated. He had definitely heard me, but didn't even acknowledge me. Still, I followed him, calling his name a few more times. He wasn't far, maybe 20 feet ahead, so I could keep him in my line of sight. When he turned the corner, heading toward the stockroom, I followed. He'd only been out of sight for 2 or 3 seconds, but when I turned the corner, he was gone. The double doors to the back room weren't even swinging. Confused, I pushed through the doors, sure he had gone this way. I knew I had just seen him, so he had to be in the stockroom, right? I turned to the left, where the store kept the backstock of TVs. As I moved closer to the TV area, I suddenly heard voices coming from the other side of the room. It was C and L. As I rounded the corner, my eyes widened. C was up on the top shelf of the steel racks, handing TVs down to L. "What the heck, C?" I said, floored. L looked up from his work, confused. "What's up?" I couldn't believe what I was seeing. There was no way C could have made it up to the top of a 20-foot rack in the time since I'd lost sight of him. He hadn't even been out of breath. "How long have you two been back here?" I asked, trying to wrap my head around what was happening. C, still perched on the top shelf, swung his legs nonchalantly. "We've been here for about half an hour, I'd say, just working through the TVs. You've been together the whole time?" I asked again, even though I already knew the answer. "Yeah, of course," L replied, pushing his glasses up his nose. "What's going on?" I explained what had happened, how I'd seen C in the electronics section, spoken to him, and followed him to the back. Both C and L were confused. C scratched his cheek. "Are you sure it was me?" "Of course, I'm sure," I said, irritated. "It's not like you have a twin working here or something." C shook his head. "I haven't been down from here since we started. There's no way you saw me in electronics." "A ghost?" L whispered. "Maybe you saw a ghost?" I was starting to feel a little unnerved. The store wasn't that old, but it did have a strange history. People said the land might be cursed, that weird things had happened here in the past. Flacco, an older woman who worked with us, often talked about it. Elle was dating her daughter at the time, and Flacco was well versed in the local history, especially the darker parts. She knew a lot of stories about the land, some of which sounded straight out of The Sopranos. We chatted for a bit longer, but my mind kept going back to what I'd seen. A ghost? A doppelganger? There was no way C could have gotten up that rack in time to beat me to the back room. As the years have passed, I've never seen anything quite as strange as that night. The store has grown more crowded over time, and with more employees and customers around, the paranormal activity has seemed to decrease. But every once in a while, items still fall off shelves when no one is near, or I'll hear someone softly call my name, only to find no one around. The store is going through another remodel as I write this, and I wonder if the activity will pick up again. After all, the last time there was a remodel, things definitely got weird. George, Oscar, and Maurice are 3 of the most frequent customers at the movie theater where I've worked as an usher for the past 5 years. In fact, they're there every single day, something most of our regular customers can't even do. How is this possible? Well, George, Oscar, and Maurice aren't people. They're the 3 ghosts that inhabit the theater. I'll go over each of them in order of least to most annoying. Thankfully, they're all harmless, at least so far. First up is Maurice. His story is the most tragic, and he's the only ghost whose origin we know. His full name is Grandpa Maurice, and the story goes that in the late 90s or early 2000s, an old man came to see a horror film and died during the movie. The cleaning crew found him after the film ended. How no one in the theater noticed during the movie is beyond me. What's strange is that nobody remembers exactly where Maurice died. Some longtime employees say it was in Theater 4, others say Theater 5 or Theater 12. But it doesn't really matter. If you enter a theater after a movie, there's a chance Maurice will be there with you. Despite the tragic story, Maurice is the most harmless ghost. He doesn't try to interact with people. The worst thing he does is give you an intense feeling of being watched when you're alone in a theater. Sometimes you might catch a glimpse of him out of the corner of your eye, sitting in a chair, only for him to vanish when you turn to look. The best way to avoid problems with Maurice is to say, "Good morning, Maurice," and "Good night, Maurice," when opening or closing the theater. It seems to keep him at bay. Next is Oscar. He's a little more intense than Maurice. We don't know where Oscar came from, but he's named after the Grouch from Sesame Street. He got the name because he hangs out in the trash hall, where we keep our bins and trash before taking them out. Every so often, Oscar gets grouchy and moves the trash cans around. I've seen it happen myself. I was tossing a bag into the bin when one of the cans behind me rolled about a foot before coming to a stop. It never stops being frustrating to walk into the hall and find the cans scattered all over the place. But that's not all Oscar does. He also messes with the service elevator in the back hallway. Sometimes, while emptying a bag of trash, I'll hear the elevator activate and come back up. We're on the 2nd floor, and every single time this happens, I'll hear distinct footsteps stepping out of the elevator. The strange thing is, the footsteps are loud and heavy, even though the elevator is about 100 feet away, down a stretch of hallway and around a corner. The sounds shouldn't carry that far. Now, you might be thinking, aren't you in a movie? Theater? Couldn't the footsteps be from a movie? No, the footsteps are very distinct. 2 solid clunks on the concrete floor, every time. The sounds sometimes get closer, right up to the point where they're about to turn the corner to where I'm standing, and then they stop. There doesn't seem to be any way to counter Oscar other than praying he's in a good mood. I've tried saying good night and good morning to him, like I do with Maurice, but it doesn't seem to help. Like the Muppet he's named after, Oscar is just an incurable grouch. Lastly, there's George. To put it bluntly, George is just a jerk. Like Oscar, I don't know where George came from or how he got his name, but George loves causing problems. Burst pipes, lights flashing on and off during movies, paper towels disappearing from dispensers. If something goes wrong, it's usually George's fault. The most memorable encounter I've had with George happened around Christmas 2022. We had a big cardboard standee for a movie behind the podium where customers scan their tickets. I was training a new girl at the podium, and we were talking about the weird things that happen at the theater. At that time, the strange activity had slowed down. She said something like, "Ghosts? Yeah, I don't believe in those." Moments later, the standee tipped over. It wasn't one of the flimsy cardboard pieces, either. It was one of the big, heavy, thick standees. The new girl immediately asked, "Did you do that?" thinking I had done it to scare her. But I hadn't. I know how difficult those things are to set up, and how heavy they are. Pushing one over as a joke would have likely cost me my job. "I see you've met George," was all I could say. There was no one else in the lobby, and the AC vent in the ceiling couldn't have blown over a standee that big. That girl didn't last long after that. Maybe another shift or 2. I was told it was because she missed a shift, but I have a feeling George had something to do with her leaving. Other employees have quit after only a shift or two as well, and the word around the theater is that George had something to do with it. I'm still at the theater to this day, and I'm sure that as long as I'm here, George, Maurice, and Oscar will be too. Maybe if George floods the bathrooms again or Oscar messes with the elevator lights, I'll be back with another story to share.